Welcome, weary traveler. Come in from the noise and find a place of rest in this quiet haven of history. Before our story truly begins, I wish to offer you a sincere welcome. Whether you are cocooned in blankets, ready to surrender to slumber, or simply seeking to untangle your thoughts with a calm historical narrative, I am grateful you have chosen to join me in this space. I often wonder from what corner of the globe you are listening and what hour your clock shows. If you wish, leave a brief note in the comments to let me know. It is always a profound joy to witness the global fellowship of history lovers that gathers here. And if you feel a kinship with this community and our immersive journeys into the past, I invite you to click the subscribe button so you will not miss our next chapter. But for now, let the clamor of the present day recede. Let us journey back together to a time long since past. A time when the icy clench of winter held a danger far greater than most of us can comprehend. An era when the turning of the seasons brought with it not just a change in the weather, but a primal fear for one's own survival. Envision, if you will, the sprawling countryside of medieval Europe. The final leaves have surrendered to the wind, and the sun hangs low and pale upon the horizon, its feeble light offering little comfort from the biting chill in the air. The frosted earth crunches beneath your feet as a breeze carries the first delicate messengers of snow. Winter is descending, and for the people of this age, that arrival signals one thing above all else: a season of profound hardship. The cold insinuates itself slowly at first, but it is a guest that will outstay its welcome for many long months. Soon the landscape will be draped in a shroud of white. The rivers and ponds will harden into glittering shields of ice. In a world before the comforts of central heating and insulated walls, the promise of true warmth is but a distant fantasy for all but the most affluent. Of course, it was not always this way. The winters of the Middle Ages were not perpetually so merciless, so unforgiving. There was an age when the seasons followed a more dependable cadence, when the first snowfall was met with a stoic acceptance rather than a creeping dread. But then, something fundamental began to change. The climate itself started to shift, heralding an epoch that history would later name the Little Ice Age. Stretching from the 14th century all the way to the 19th, the Little Ice Age delivered colder temperatures and more severe winters than anyone in living memory had known. The reasons for this global cooling are still debated by scholars, but its effects were felt with brutal clarity across the land. Harvests failed, livestock withered, and the frigid winds howled with ever-increasing ferocity. One of the most legendary examples of the Little Ice Age's power was the Great Frost of 1709. That winter, temperatures fell so low that rivers and lakes froze solid. In London, the River Thames transformed into a frozen boulevard, where merchants set up stalls and citizens even dared to light fires directly upon the ice. It was a spectacular and surreal sight, but one that came with a terrible price. Countless souls perished from the cold that year, huddled in their homes as the world outside became a kingdom of ice. Yet, amidst the widespread suffering, some found a strange kind of opportunity in the frigid stillness. One such mind was that of a young Isaac Newton, then a student at Cambridge University. When the Great Frost descended, Newton was compelled to return to his family's farm. There, confined by the fire, he discovered he had an abundance of time to contemplate the great enigmas of the cosmos. It was during this enforced retreat that Newton began to formulate some of his most revolutionary concepts, laying the groundwork for his later theories on calculus and optics. It makes one wonder what other great intellects might have been ignited to brilliance by the quiet solitude of a long, cold winter. It is a quiet reminder that even in the most shadowed of times, the human spirit instinctively reaches for the light. But for the overwhelming majority of people in the medieval era, winter was a season to be endured, not a catalyst for intellectual breakthroughs. The wealthy could certainly afford thick woolen garments, a generous supply of firewood, and well-stocked pantries to see them through the barren months. But for the peasants and serfs who formed the vast base of the population, the reality was starkly different. Imagine awakening each morning in a simple one-room cottage, the air heavy with smoke from a sputtering hearth. Your breath forms a mist in the air as you rise from your straw-filled mattress, taking care not to disturb the shivering bodies of your family, huddled together for warmth. The cold seeps in through every crack in the wattle and daub walls, numbing your fingers and toes until they ache with a deep, persistent pain. Your breakfast, if you are fortunate, might consist of a meager portion of porridge or a piece of stale bread. The food preserved from the last harvest is already beginning to diminish, and you are keenly aware that the long winter ahead will only bring greater scarcity. The livestock, too, are feeling the strain. Their coats are matted with frost as they huddle together in the barn, their breaths steaming in the frigid air. As the brief day unfolds, you trudge out into the snow to gather whatever firewood you can find. It is back-breaking labor, and your hands quickly become raw and chapped from the cold. But you persist, knowing that without a fire, your family will not survive the night. You picture the faces of your children, their small features pinched with hunger and cold, and you press on, driven by a primal need to protect them. This was the lived reality for so many during medieval times. A constant, grueling battle against the elements, a struggle for survival that commanded every waking moment. And yet, even when confronted with such relentless hardship, moments of profound resilience and even joy could be found. You see, the medieval world was a world deeply connected to the rhythms of nature. The passage of the seasons was observed not just through changes in the weather, but through a rich and vibrant tapestry of rituals and festivities. And so, even in the bleakest depths of winter, there were glimmers of light to be found, beacons of hope against the encroaching darkness. One such beacon was the midwinter feast of St. Stephen, held each year on the 26th of December. For a fleeting moment, the rigid social hierarchies of medieval society were turned on their heads. A humble peasant or serf would be crowned the lord of Misrule for the day. This fortunate soul would then preside over a boisterous celebration filled with food, drink, and revelry, a rare and precious moment of indulgence in an otherwise austere and unforgiving existence. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of hope during the medieval winter was the simple, powerful act of coming together. In a world where survival often hinged on the strength of one's community, the bonds of family and friendship assumed a sacred importance. Picture, if you will, a small village huddled against the snow, the smoke from its chimneys mingling with the leaden sky, a sign of defiant life amidst the barren landscape. Inside the cottages, families crowd together around the hearth, sharing stories and what little food they possess. There is a sense of unity here, a shared purpose in the face of a common struggle. Neighbors trudge through the deep snow to check on one another, bringing a few extra logs for the fire, or a small pot of stew to those in greatest need. In the flickering firelight, their faces are etched with weariness, but also with a quiet, resolute determination. They have survived the winters of the past, and they will survive this one too. And so the long cold months marched onward, the snow piling higher, and the ice growing thicker with each passing day. But even in the darkest depths of winter, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. For the people of medieval times knew, with an unshakable certainty, that no matter how brutal the season, spring would inevitably return. They watched for the first telltale signs with a keen and practiced eye, the slight lengthening of the days, the softening of the earth beneath the snow. And when at long last, the thaw began, it was celebrated with a joy and reverence that we in our modern world can scarcely imagine. Plough Monday marked the official end of the winter season, a day when work in the fields could begin anew. The ploughs that had lain idle for so long were brought out and blessed in elaborate ceremonies, a symbol of the renewed cycle of life. As the first furrows were cut into the earth, there was a palpable sense of relief and gratitude in the air. Life had been hard, yes, bitterly hard at times, but they had endured. Through the long dark months of winter, through the hunger and the cold and the gnawing uncertainty, the people of medieval Europe had held fast to the promise of spring. And now, as the land began to thaw and green shoots pushed their way towards the sun, that promise was gloriously fulfilled. It is a resilience that is difficult to truly fathom in our modern age of convenience and comfort. The idea of facing such relentless hardship, year after year, is almost unimaginable. And yet there is something deeply humbling in the knowledge that our ancestors did just that. They faced the brutal realities of their world with a strength and fortitude that is nothing short of remarkable. They found hope in the darkest of times and joy in the simplest of things. And in doing so, they left us a legacy of resilience, that echoes down through the ages. So the next time you find yourself shivering on a cold winter's day, take a moment to remember those who came before. Remember their struggles and their triumphs, their sorrow and their joy. And above all, remember the unbreakable human spirit that carried them through even the harshest of winters. Because in the end, that is perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from the medieval world, that no matter how dark the night or how cold the wind, the promise of spring is always waiting, just around the corner. And with that, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the brutal winters of medieval Europe. I hope that these tales of hardship and resilience have brought a new perspective to your own experiences of the season. May you always find warmth and comfort in the bonds of family and community, just as our ancestors did so long ago. And may the promise of spring light your way through even the coldest of nights. Thank you for joining me in this cozy corner of history. And remember, if you enjoyed our time together tonight, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and share these stories with a friend. There are so many more fascinating tales to explore together, but for now, I'll bid you a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. As the brutal conditions of winter tightened their icy grip on medieval society, even the most privileged were not immune to the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty, primitive castles, ill-equipped for the harshest months, royal households faced a formidable challenge in staving off the biting cold and keeping the court adequately provisioned. The logistics of maintaining a royal residence during winter were nothing short of a monumental undertaking. Massive quantities of firewood needed to be stockpiled to fuel the roaring hearths that provided the only source of heat. The kitchen staff toiled ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables that would sustain the court through the long, lean months when fresh fare was scarce. Servants scrambled to seal every crack and gap to keep out the insidious chill, but even the most diligent preparations often proved insufficient against winter's relentless assault. In one particularly chilling tale, a medieval queen is said to have tragically perished from exposure within her own palace walls. According to chroniclers, Queen Elizabeth of Hungary was discovered frozen in her bed one bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle that was meant to be her refuge. As grim fates like these demonstrate, the spectre of death cast its ominous pall over the medieval world in winter's dark depths. But even amidst such bleakness, the indomitable human spirit endured and found cause to rekindle hope. For much of the populace, that faint glimmer came in the form of the Feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration falling on December 26. This day marked a brief respite from the unending drudgery and privation of peasant life, a rare sanctioned opportunity for revelry and indulgence. Central to the feast was the tradition of misrule, a ceremonial inversion of the normal social order. For this single day, a commoner would be appointed the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over the merriment and issue playful edicts to his betters. However fleeting, this act of festive license provided a vital pressure valve for the simmering tensions and resentments bred by the oppressive feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for one mirth-filled day, where all could partake as equals in the feasting, gaming, and carousing. The sense of community fostered by such celebrations was more than mere diversion, it was a critical survival mechanism. With winter's cruelty threatening to break both body and spirit, the bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during the Feast of Stephen and similar revelries helped sustain the populace through the leanest times. One chronicle from 1377 recounts the poignant tale of two peasant families, neighbors whose meager winter stores had been exhausted long before spring's arrival. On the verge of perishing from hunger, they pooled the last of their tattered resources to share a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That gesture of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining ravages. Such acts of compassion formed the very marrow of medieval society in winter. When a helping hand extended to a frostbitten traveler, or an extra log given to a shivering widow, could spell the difference between life and death. The grim, shared purpose of weathering winter's onslaught together shaped a culture of interdependence that defied the era's often ruthless stratification. But even the warmest expressions of conviviality and fellow feeling inevitably cooled as winter's unrelenting misery stretched on interminably. The feast of St. Stephen was but a small flare of light and levity amidst the frozen darkness, a momentary reprieve before the bleak slog of January, February, and March. As stores dwindled, bellies hungered, and the cold crept past the most assiduously stoked hearth, the faint promise of distant spring seemed to fade into impossibility. And yet, year after arduous year, medieval society endured against all odds. Through unimaginable adversity and hardship, they clung to existence, upheld by the grit, fortitude, and fellowship forged in winter's unsparing crucible. As the land lay dormant and the sun retreated, they somehow found within themselves the tenacity to carry on. One can only imagine the flood of profound relief and joy that greeted the first tentative signs of winter's passing. The slight softening of the frigid air, the incremental lengthening of daylight, the hopeful drip of icicles yielding to the sun's strengthening rays. After months of unremitting struggle, the sight of the season's initial lost battles against the forces of light and life must have seemed nothing short of miraculous. For the battle-weary tillers of the earth, no day was more welcome than Plough Monday. This traditional start of the agricultural year, falling on the first Monday after Epiphany, in early January, heralded the ground's imminent thawing and reawakening. Though the deepest rigors of winter had yet to fully release their stranglehold, the ritual preparations of Plough Monday offered a tangible talisman of hope, an assurance of winter's inevitable loosening and spring's return. One can picture a patchwork of furrowed fields slowly emerging from the receding snows and frosts, the newly harnessed draft teams leaning into the first tentative overturning of the frigid clods. With each sod upended to greet the strengthening sun, medieval man dealt another blow to winter's retreating sovereignty, and proclaimed his dogged persistence in the face of nature's caprice. We in the modern world, with our central heat and electric blankets, our well-stocked larders and resilient infrastructure, can scarcely fathom the immense fortitude required to endure the unremitting brutality of a medieval winter. If the season's impositions seem daunting to us now from the cozy remove of our temperature-controlled bubbles, how incomprehensible must true winter suffering be? And yet, when we grumble about the minor inconveniences of a delayed flight or a rain-snarled commute, perhaps we would do well to reflect on the unyielding misery experienced by our forebears during those interminable frozen months. What reserves of resilience and tenacity they were forced to draw upon, year after arduous year, simply to survive. Their ability to eke out moments of celebration and fellowship amid such unrelenting privation seems nearly superhuman to modern sensibilities. That they not only withstood winter's ravages, but managed to find slivers of light in the all-encompassing darkness, is a testament to the indomitable spirit that slumbers within us all, waiting to be roused by hardship's clarion call. So the next time we feel our modern discontent starting to chafe, perhaps we would do well to cast our minds back to the icy plights of our predecessors. In remembrance of those who came before, let us embrace the opportunity to tap into our own dormant reserves of grit and forbearance. And as we nestle gratefully into our warm beds, let us spare a thought for all those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with the weapons of will, fellowship, and undying hope. As the new year dawned, and the festivities of Plough Monday faded into memory, medieval life settled back into its familiar winter rhythm. Short, frigid days and long, frosty nights were the hallmarks of the season. The fortunate retreated to the meager warmth of smoky hovels and drafty manors. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of the greatest winter hardships was the ever-present threat of sickness. In the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time, disease could spread like wildfire. The common cold was an uncommon misery, leaving sufferers red-nosed and blurry-eyed. But far more serious illnesses also stalked the populace. Influenza was a fearsome foe, striking down young and old alike with its telltale fever, chills, and aches. In an age without vaccines or effective treatments, flu outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 was particularly brutal, with a virulent strain of influenza raging across Europe. In Paris alone, over 10,000 souls perished. Pneumonia was another stealthy killer, preying on those weakened by hunger or other illnesses. The winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to run rampant. It was not unusual for multiple members of the same family to succumb, leaving orphaned children and shattered lives in its wake. Even royalty was not spared the ravages of winter sickness. In fact, disease often spread even more rapidly in castles and courts, due to the constant flow of people in and out. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence along with their entourage. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife, Jane Seymour, to postnatal complications, likely exacerbated by the poor hygienic practices of the age. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable of all. Harsh weather, meager rations, and unsanitary conditions combined to make winter a truly dangerous time for the young. Infants born in the cold months faced an especially precarious start to life. In London in the 1500s, fully half of all children did not survive to see their 5th birthday. One poignant practice of the age speaks volumes: the custom of bone lace. This involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a seriously ill infant. Should the child pass away, this ribbon could then be used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's deadly toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside the home and within, winter was a time to batten down the hatches and pray for survival. For those of limited means, even the basic comforts of shelter, food and warmth could not be taken for granted. The icy grip of winter poverty was relentless and pitiless. Firewood was a precious commodity, with strict laws governing the gathering of fallen timbers from forests. A peasant family might huddle around a makeshift fire of dried dung and straw, striving to eke out some feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared what heat there was, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Food supplies dwindled to a meager subsistence of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The autumn harvest's bounty was a distant memory, and the first shy greenery of spring was still months away. Foraging for winter nutrients meant scouring the stark landscape for hardy fare like nettles, garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables in winter made for some very dreary dinner pots. A typical pottage might contain peas, beans, salted pork, and if lucky, some foraged greens and wild onions for flavor. Tasteless and tedious, but enough to keep body and soul together until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other calamities could obliterate food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was a particularly harrowing time, caused by relentlessly heavy rains that rotted crops in the fields across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people reduced to eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh in their hunger. Parents were said to have smothered their starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses littered the streets and fields, too numerous for proper burial. Although this famine was remarkable for its severity and scale, localized crop failures and food shortages were an ever-present menace. A medieval winter diet walked a tightrope between subsistence and starvation. It was a time of hunkering down with the knowledge that things would likely get worse before they got better. Beyond basic survival, winter affected every facet of medieval culture. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment took on the unmistakable stamp of the season. The sheer drudgery of scratching out an existence in the bitter cold colored all aspects of life. Socially, winter was a time of drawing in and relying on the bonds of family and community. The cheery gatherings around the Yule log gave way to more sedate pursuits. With travel treacherous and daylight scarce, people looked inward for amusement and enrichment. During the long dark evenings, telling stories and singing songs helped to while away the hours. The flickering light of rushlights or tallow candles illuminated scenes of sewing, weaving, and whittling. With idle hands seen as the devil's playground, industriousness was more necessity than virtue. Winter's confinement, at least, provided ample time for such gainful activities. For the literate, winter offered a chance to curl up with a good book, although this was a rather exclusive club. In England at the close of the 15th century, a humble tradesman's library might boast a Bible, a Book of Hours, and perhaps some merry jests or tales of Robin Hood. Only the wealthy could afford the lavishly illuminated volumes so prized by bibliophiles. Those who could read often did so aloud, for the benefit and entertainment of the whole household. Winter was a time for sharing treasured stories of brave knights, canny tricksters, and star-crossed lovers. The chivalric adventures of King Arthur and his court were perennial favorites, their intricate plots and noble themes helping to transport listeners far beyond the close confines of their winter refuge. Less wholesome entertainments also served to liven up the tedium of winter days. Gambling with dice was a popular pastime, often leading to heated tempers and empty purses. The clatter of knucklebones and the rattle of dice would ring out in many a tavern and great hall as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was another common winter diversion. The fermented comforts of ale, mead, and wine helped to boost both body temperature and spirits. Public houses saw a roaring trade, offering fellowship, entertainment, and an escape from the bitter cold. Inebriation often led to looser tongues and lower inhibitions, sparking lively debates, bawdy songs, and occasionally a brawl or two. The short, dark days of winter also lent themselves to quiet reflection and spiritual contemplation. The church held great sway in the medieval mind, and winter was a time for drawing closer to God. With agricultural work at a lull, more time could be devoted to prayer, penance, and good works. The traditional nativity plays and pageants of Christmastide gave way to more somber devotions as winter deepened. The pious might undertake pilgrimages to holy sites, braving the harsh conditions as a sign of their commitment and devotion. Others spent hours in hushed churches, fingering rosary beads, numb with cold, and meditating on their eternal soul. Charity was also an important winter value, with almsgiving seen as a Christian duty. The 7 acts of corporal mercy laid out a blueprint for generosity, feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked, visiting prisoners, comforting the sick, and burying the dead. In a season of scarcity and hardship, small gestures of human kindness could make all the difference. Of course, winter's harshness sometimes brought out the worst in human nature as well. Crime tended to rise as desperation set in, and opportunities for theft increased. With people spending more time indoors in close quarters, tempers often frayed, leading to a spike in assaults and other violent crimes. The medieval justice system was ill-equipped to deal with this seasonal surge in lawlessness. Trials were often delayed until the weather improved, leaving the accused to languish in dank and overcrowded jails. Punishments could be harsh, with fines, floggings, and even executions meted out to those found guilty. But even in the face of winter's bleak realities, the indomitable human spirit endured. People found small joys and moments of levity where they could. The distant promise of spring sustained them through the darkest and coldest nights. The lengthening days of February brought a welcome reprieve with the feast of Saint Valentine on the 14th. This ancient pagan fertility rite, Christianized into a celebration of love, was enthusiastically embraced by the people of the Middle Ages. It was a bright spot of warmth and tenderness in the very heart of winter's depths. The custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was well established by the 15th century. Eligible ladies and lads would gather to draw slips of paper from a bowl, sealing their romantic fate for the next year. These annual pairings often led to merry flirtations and sometimes even marriages. Flowers, sweets, and sentimental verses were common tokens of affection exchanged between Valentine's sweethearts. The simple act of receiving a handmade card from an admirer could set hearts aflutter, even in the chilliest weather. Winter, for all its woes, could not freeze the fires of love. As the feast of Saint Valentine passed into Lent, the austerities of the season intensified, but there was a sense that the worst was now behind, and brighter days lay ahead. The snowdrops and crocuses poking their fragile heads through the frost offered tangible evidence that winter's icy reign was finally weakening. Throughout the Middle Ages, the relentless cycle of the seasons shaped every aspect of life, and no season stamped its mark more firmly than winter. It was a time of privation and hardship, when mere survival was an achievement. And yet, it was also a time of resilience and quiet fortitude in the face of the harshest of elements. Medieval winter was a test of the human spirit, a proving ground for the values of faith, family, and community. The winking icicles, frosty meadows, and long-shadowed fields may have been a postcard-perfect scene, but the realities of the season were anything but picturesque. However, this crucible of snow, and ice, and want also forged a people of remarkable grit and endurance. The Middle Ages were built on the backs of those who could weather the very worst that winter had to offer and still find reason to hope for spring. There is perhaps no greater tribute to their stubborn vitality. So the next time you find yourself bemoaning a delayed train or a slushy sidewalk, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Unequipped with thermal socks, central heating, or weather apps, they faced each winter as a battle to be fought with every resource at their disposal. And they emerged victorious, spring after spring. We are the heirs and beneficiaries of their tenacity and unbreakable spirit. And with that, I will leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket, secure in the knowledge that winter has been largely tamed, thanks in no small part to those who came before and showed us how it's done. May your dreams be of gentle snowfalls and toasty hearths, and may you wake to a world where winter is more friend than foe. As the weak winter sun struggled to pierce the leaden grey clouds, the people of medieval Europe shivered and drew their meagre cloaks tighter about their shoulders. The icy tendrils of winter's grasp seemed to creep into the very marrow of their bones, chilling them to the core. For the poorest peasants, the cruel irony was that their ragged woolen garments, which felt so oppressively hot and sticky in the sweltering labours of summertime, now provided scarcely more warmth than a gossamer veil against winter's biting onslaught. They huddled together in their hovels, thankful for the meagre heat thrown by a smoky fire, their breath misting in the chilly air. The animals felt winter's bite too. The elderly draft horse, ribs protruding beneath its shaggy coat, dreamed wistfully of the long-gone lush summer grass as it ate its apportioned wisp of hay. The milk cow lowed mournfully, its teats chapped and raw in the frigid draughts that knifed through the barn walls. Even the wily barn cats looked a bit less haughty, their usual disdain blunted by the gnawing in their bellies and the frost on their whiskers. Yes, winter was an especially trying time for the lowest rungs of medieval society, but even the nobility, cocooned in their grand drafty castles, were far from immune from the deprivations of the season. Here, many a blue-blooded maiden wailed in despair, as her priceless silk gowns proved useless against the dank chill of stone walls. The castle kitchen strained to concoct enough piping hot delicacies to stoke the noble innards. It is said that King Henry II of England, felled by a severe case of the winter shivers, once burned an entire chair just to warm his royal posterior for a blessed moment or two. His servants despaired, knowing His Majesty's temper was liable to ignite even faster than the furniture if he remained uncomfortably cold for long. But for peasant and king alike, winter seemed to grind on interminably, an unrelenting slog of frozen misery. The only respite came from the occasional celebration or feast day, brief islands of revelry in the dark ocean of winter. The people seized upon these moments of light and levity, cherishing them like a drowning man gasping for air. Perhaps the most anticipated was the feast of St. Stephen on December 26, a day of unbridled merriment and delightfully subversive reversals of fortune. By ancient tradition, a mere peasant was crowned the Lord of Misrule on this day, gleefully lording over his betters in a delicious bit of sanctioned rebellion. One can only imagine the raucous peals of laughter that rang out as the lowliest serf ordered about the local baron, with mock imperiousness. For one glorious day, the normal rules and hierarchies fell away, and all revelled together as equals. The frigid drudgery of winter seemed to recede, driven back by the bright blaze of communal joy. But soon enough, the merry festivities would end, the misrule would be righted, and the cold, hard reality of winter would descend once more. The people would trudge back to their hearths and their chores, the bite of the wind seeming to mock the fleeting warmth of fellowship. The battle against winter's grim siege resumed, unabated. And yet, even in the bleakest depths of winter, there were quiet acts of courage and compassion that melted the frost from even the most careworn hearts. Neighbors shared scarce provisions with those even less fortunate, exhibiting a generosity of spirit that no cold could diminish. A certain Dame Matilda of York was said to have once given her only cloak to a poor beggar woman, shivering herself through the long walk home. When questioned why she would relinquish her one defense against the brutal cold, she simply smiled serenely and said, "The warmth of human kindness is a fire that never goes out." Such selflessness, such nobility of spirit, was the secret weapon with which the medieval people armed themselves against winter's relentless battery. For though winter could freeze their fingers and toes, it could not touch the invincible summer that reigned eternal in their hearts. And so they endured, they persisted, they triumphed in their own way, over the harshest of seasons. The first green buds of spring were more than just a welcome sight. They were a living testament to the tenacity of the human will, the indomitable spirit that could outlast any winter, no matter how dark or cold. As we snuggle deeper under our cozy electric blankets, perhaps we would do well to remember the trials and triumphs of our medieval forebears. For in their unending battle against the elements, in their stubborn refusal to bow before nature's capricious fury, they forged a legacy of resilience that warms us still today. The chill winds of winter may still moan outside our windows, but we can draw strength from the knowledge that if they could brave the brutal cold with naught but a cloak and their unquenchable human spirit, well then surely we can survive until spring arrives once more. Spring at last. As the icy grip of winter finally began to loosen, medieval folk eagerly awaited the return of fairer weather. They had endured months of bitter cold, huddling in cramped quarters, stomachs growling from meager winter rations. But now, as the sun lingered a bit longer in the sky each day, glinting off the melting snow, there was cause for celebration. Across the land, people emerged from their winter cocoons, blinking in the bright spring light, like bears stumbling out from hibernation. Children burst out of their homes, delighting in the feel of fresh breezes on their faces, instead of the stinging bite of winter wind. With giddy laughter they ran through the squelching mud, marveling at the first brave crocuses poking their petals through the thawing ground. Soon, vibrant spring and summer produce would replace the bland preserved gruel and hard cheese that had barely sustained them through the long dark months. It's perhaps difficult for us to imagine from our modern vantage point just how momentous this seasonal shift was. For our medieval forebears, the arrival of spring was nothing short of life-affirming. It meant they had weathered winter's brutal assault, staving off starvation and sickness for one more year. Some of that elation can still be heard echoing through the ages, in lively medieval folk tunes and verses that welcome spring's sweet return. One English song jauntily proclaimed, "Loudly sing, cuckoo. The seed is growing, and the meadow is blooming, and the wood is springing up anew. Sing, cuckoo." The sheer irrepressible joy is palpable, spilling out in simple yet evocative rhyme. So let us take a moment to appreciate the immense fortitude, resilience, and zest for life embodied by our medieval ancestors. As we nestle into our warm beds, let us spare a thought for those long-ago souls, the ones who would heave a sigh of pure relief as the snow gave way to mud, flinging open their shutters and letting the spring air rush in. The ones who met winter's brutality with a tenacity and exuberant will to live that should humble us to this day. Let their strength be a reminder to us when we face our own bleak seasons, literally or metaphorically. If they could emerge from the depths of winter privation with such unabashed joy, then surely we too can find wellsprings of hope to sustain us. The thaw will come, the sun will return, and we will step out once more into the light.